spirit of life known by many names and many cultures, available to all throughout time. That renewing of our spirit, that renewing of our soul, that love of the earth and critters and fellow humans that give us hope for the future. We give thanks for this community. We give thanks for this faith. We give thanks for all who gather in peace and love and compassion. We remember all those who are suffering, who are in harm's way, who are in the victims of war and violence. And we celebrate those small and big victories, those small and big triumphs of the Spirit. Mostly today we give thanks. We pause to reflect on all the blessings in our lives. Blessed be. Amen. This morning we're going to focus a little bit in our time together on this wonderful book, See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love by Valerie Kaur, who is a civil rights activist, lawyer, filmmaker, innovator, and founder of the Revolutionary Love Project. She has worked in social justice issues ranging from hate crimes to digital freedom. Her speeches have reached millions worldwide and inspired a movement to reclaim love as a force for justice. She is the daughter of Sikh farmers in California, and she earned degrees from Stanford, the Divinity School at Harvard, and the law school at Yale. She lives in a multi-generational home in LA with her husband, son, and daughter. Who's read this book before? Yeah, a few of us, a number of us. Wonderful to spend this time together. So I want to just share with you my impressions of this and just lift up a few ideas from this book. It's a book of resistance. It's a prophetic book. By prophetic, I mean that it lifts up a vision of what is possible. It laments and weeps for that which exploits and dominates and is violent, unequal, unjust. It laments and weeps like prophets of old. It resists that kind of acceptance of the status quo, and it calls us forth to this revolutionary love. I wanted to share a reading before I get to this book. It's from Thich Nhat Hanh, and I think it really talks about the humanizing aspect of this book. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist, says, resistance at its root, I think, must mean more than resistance against war. It is resistance against all kinds of things that are like war. Because living in modern society, one feels that she cannot easily retain integrity. He cannot easily retain wholeness. One is robbed of humanness, the capacity of being oneself. He says, when I drive through Paris, the noises and the traffic jam make me nervous. Once I've gone through Paris, I become less than myself. And there are so many things like that in modern life that make you lose yourself. So perhaps, first of all, resistance means opposition to being invaded, occupied, assaulted, and destroyed by the system. The purpose here is to seek the healing of ourselves in order to be able to see more clearly. This may sound as though it falls short of a positive act of resistance. I think communities of resistance should be places where people can return to themselves more easily, where the conditions are such that they can heal themselves and recover their wholeness. It is this humanness this return to humanness that Valerie Kaur really focuses on in her book, See No Stranger. So for those of you who have read it, what are some things you remember about that book? What are some things that strike you that you can recall? Anyone? Well, one of the things she says, she was a Sikh kid growing up in California, in a very agricultural part of California. And what she remembers is being taught a prayer from her tradition early on that was a prayer of unity and compassion, unity and oneness. And through that, she began to reflect on the idea that there was resilience built into her community, resilience that pointed the way towards revolutionary love. So what are these kids' names in front of me? What are these kids' names in front of me?
John and Charlotte.
Hi, John and Charlotte. So one of the prayers that we sing every Sunday here, we hope you'll remember. We sang it just a few minutes ago. Spirit of life, come unto me. Do you remember that song that we just sang? Yeah. We hope that when you get older and write a book like this, that's a pretty big book, isn't it? When you get older and write a book like this, you'll be able to say, I was part of a community that taught me, Spirit of life, come unto me. Right? Spirit of life, give me the face to see that no one is a stranger and that love is all around us. That's our hope for you. Spirit of life. So, she saw that cooked into that prayer, cooked into her community, was a sense of resilience no matter what happened. So she tells the story of her family, her father being born on that California land, her grandparents coming to live on that California land. She was born on that land. She had been there a century, and as a kid, she would just run around on her tractor, her braids. She would go around and she would be free. There was peace all around her. But then when she got to school as a 6-year-old, she heard things that were like hateful towards her because she looked different than all those white kids with their blonde hair in California looks. And she heard her first racial slur. Somebody called her like a brown dog or something on the playground. And she couldn't believe it. She went home to her grandfather and said, let me tell you what happened. And he said, oh goodness, remember our prayer that in this world, all things are one. Everything is about unity. There is nothing but unity in this world. The grandfather said, when our religion teaches that you shall see no stranger, that we love no matter what, that kind of love is very dangerous. It's very upsetting to others. It's very radical because it means that we have regard for someone even if they don't have regard for us. It means that we love even if they do not love us back. Even if they hate us, we love. And she said from that moment, she began to work in her own brain on the ideas that made up this manifesto of revolutionary love. Growing up in that part of California, there were conservative Christians all around her. Christians who wished to convert her. One time, even, she says, as a young person, someone did an exorcism on her, if you can imagine. Held her, rocked her back and forth, and said, get out of her Satan. Just proclaim that Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. And she said she couldn't do that because she felt like there were many ways to experience the divine, to encounter the holy. In that moment, she needed to draw upon her sick faith to understand that she was called to love no matter what, but she was angry and she was raging and she was hurt and she felt betrayed. But underneath it, she had this revolutionary love. In order to survive, she needed to feel that anger and continue to walk towards love. Now, she's a prophet, a modern day prophet. She refuses to turn away from the suffering of this world. She believes that transformation is possible. Earlier today, I delivered a sermon on the second source of our living tradition, the second source that we recognize as important for us, and that is the honoring of those prophetic voices that encourage us to confront the powers and structures of evil with compassion, justice, and transformative love. At the end of the day, if we do not believe that love is transformative, then there's no reason for us to gather. How do we begin? How do we begin to walk towards that kind of love, towards that kind of idea that there are no strangers? She calls strangers a part of me that I just have not yet met. She says, seeing no stranger begins in wonder. It is to look upon the face of anyone and choose to say, you are a part of me that I do not yet know. Wonder is the wellspring for love. Who we wonder about determines whose stories we hear, whose joys and pain we share. Those we grieve with, those we sit with and weep with, are ultimately those we organize with and advocate for. When a critical mass of people come together to wonder about one another, grieve with one another, and fight with and for one another, we begin to build the solidarity needed for a collective liberation and transformation, a solidarity rooted in love. This is the prophetic endeavor, the project of love and solidarity. It requires wondering about and wondering with one another. And that whole idea of wondering about and wondering with requires proximity. Our solidarity will be made stronger by being close with one another, grieving with one another, laughing with one another, hearing one another's stories. So, in order to help us practice this and get it away from abstract thought, but to really practice this, she offers up a love compass. And I just want to share with you a little bit about this. The compass is designed to practice loving, and it can be turned toward ourselves, our opponents, and others. Love is a form of sweet labor, she writes, fierce, bloody, imperfect, and life-giving. It can be taught, modeled, and practiced. It engages all of our emotions. And when we think we've come to the end of the line, wonder, being curious, can return us again to love. So, to love others is to practice seeing others as a brother or a sister. Don't other them, brother them. And in order to do that, Valerie Kaur suggests you say in your mind, when you see a stranger, when you imagine somebody on the other side of the world. You are a part of me I do not yet know. It is a wonder about them, be curious about who they are, to deeply hear their story. And when the story becomes too painful, when we wish to turn away, it is important to remember that all we are called to be is present, and to find a way to grieve with them and listen to them and sit with them in their pain, and then ask the question, what is needed here? How can I learn more about this history? How can I march with them when they're suffering? You learn how to center those voices and accompany them and fight with them and for them. What is my role in this moment? That's all we're called to ask. And then to shine our little light as best we can into that corner of the world. She never believes that we are to love our enemies, because she doesn't believe there are enemies. They're just merely opponents. We know that there are people who see the world differently, that we have radical differences of opinion about. And if they are taking away rights, if they are taking away dignity, then we have every responsibility to speak up against that vision of the world. We are often tempted to walk away or push them away or to overcome them or defeat them. But she says another way is possible, and that is to tend the wound. Ours, and possibly, if it's safe, theirs. She suggests first the practice of rage. Any of us who have worked in social justice work, and I want you to hear me loud and clear, I have worked in social justice for 30 years of my life. When I worked on Capitol Hill, I worked for justice. I hung out with Catholic workers who taught me to dumpster dive. I worked with GLBT folks before most. So those of us who work on social justice, and I know you have too, rage is part of the story. Righteous indignation and righteous anger is part of the story. It's not to be apologized for. It's not to be dismissed. It is an opportunity to learn and go deeper into the reality of things. When I worked against the death penalty for a year, out of a deep commitment to my faith, I was shaken more often than not, enraged more often than not, by sympathetic opponents. Sympathetic opponents. People who were Republicans generally, who were like, Roger, I'm Catholic. I oppose the death penalty. I am with you on this issue, and I can't do anything about it. I can't do one thing about it. Why? It's part of your faith. Why can't you do one thing about it? Because if I do that, I'll be flanked from the right. I'll be primaried from the right. So I've got to keep my mouth shut. That's what we would go back to the office on Capitol Hill in Denver and rage about. Was not the folks, like the folks who were like, we want to continue the death penalty. We like it. We think it works. We could live with that. I could live with that. Like, I know where you're coming from. I get it. Right? We can try to convince each other, but it was the sympathetic ones, the sympathetic ones who remained silent in the face of injustice. That's where we would rage. And once we were done raging, once we were done, we were called to listen, to understand, to listen for the story under the story under the talking points, the story under the arguments. And for there to ask yourself, What can I do inside these institutions to make reform and to build the world we wish to see? The world, the beloved community we seek. How can we change the conditions that drive oppression, that drive denial, that drive silence, that drive complicity, right? It happens in institutions of all kinds. And how can we build the world anew? Now, Valerie, remember she encountered all these Christians? She thought that the only way to be Christian was to hate other people and to try to do an exercise on them. She wondered, when she was 17, she wondered, why do all these people think I'm going to hell? And my family too. So finally she was ready to do something about it. Can you imagine a 17-year-old doing this? She decided to go to a church, and she was going to debate the priest in front of the church. This is why I'm not going to hell, and this is why my family's not going to hell. She knocks on the door. You remember this story? She knocks on the door. And this sweet, somebody like Cindy, the sweet woman comes, and there's nobody else there. This sweet woman, she's got like a floral dress on. Honey, can I help you? And she was like, I heard music. I thought I'd come in. And she was like, well, come on in. And she was practicing the organ, And she continued to practice the organ. And in that moment, Valerie just had this heart-opening experience. She loved the music. She felt that prayer of unity washing over her. She says her heart just opened. And she starts weeping. And the sweet little lady is done practicing her organ, and she comes over and says, are you okay? And Valerie says, yes, I just don't believe I'm going to hell. And the woman was like, well, she said, I don't either. She said, I don't believe in a God that would send me to hell. And the woman was like, I don't either. And they sat and talked. And she was like, oh, some people believe that that's how you do religion, but not me. I don't believe there's a God that would send you to hell. It was the first time, she says, she met a Christian who didn't think she was going to hell. She's met many since, of course, in her activism, but it was a revelation to her. And she says she began to see that religions, hers, Christianity, Judaism, Hindu, Buddhist, all of the world's religion were a treasure chest of scripture and poetry and music that you could just explore around in. And some of those scriptures could do harm, and some of them could build up the beloved community that we seek. The world of peace, equality, freedom, love, justice, compassion, and beauty. She says that prayer of unity and oneness swept over her, and she saw the world anew. And finally, the compass turns towards loving ourselves. It's a labor of love, and she literally uses the metaphor of labor, giving birth. Breathe and push, breathe and push. She says the midwife, when you're giving birth, and some of you know this better than I would, but the midwife says, breathe, push, breathe, push. It's not just one breath and a bunch of pushing. It's this back and forth. When she realizes she is stressed and strained and pushed beyond where she needs to be, she'll remind herself to breathe, to take a moment, to recite one of her sacred prayers, the prayers that remind her we're all one. And then she will push. Then she'll get on with her activism, her civil rights lawyering, her accompaniment. And she'll remember in that moment that pushing through the uncomfortable emotions pushing through the uncomfortable sensations, pushing through the uncomfortable situations is how change happens. We are all midwives in this process of birthing revolutionary love into the world. So I'll just end with one of those prayers that she lifts up. Since I found my sacred company, I see no enemy. I see no stranger. All of us belong to each other. What the divine does, I accept as good. I have received this wisdom from the holy. The one pervades all. Gazing upon the one, beholding the one, we blossom forth in happiness. Guru Nnak called us to see no stranger. Abraham to open our tents to all. Jesus to love our neighbors. Muhammad to take in the orphan. Mirabai to love without limit. They all expanded the circle of who counts as one of us, and therefore who is worthy of our care and concern. They spoke of a common vision of our interconnectedness and interdependence. May it be so.